Director of Social Studies, Lauren Greenfield, with staff writer at The Atlantic, Shirley Li.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So as we all just saw, your project, Social Studies, is such an intimate look at the world of teens today, coming of age in the era of social media. I want to rewind to the beginning of this project. I understand that you started it several years ago, and I mean, this is so timely. There's been an influx of studies about the so-called anxiety generation. Now, I'd like to know who or what inspired you in the very beginning to get started on this project and to go straight to the source, teenagers' phones.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for coming. It's so nice to be here. I'm such a fan of The Atlantic, and the speakers here are so incredible. Two reasons, really. My first project, my first photography book was about LA teenagers. It was called Fast Forward, Growing Up in the Shadow of Hollywood, and it was about the early loss of innocence with the influence of the media. At that time, cable and MTV and music, and so seeing this new media kind of take hold, I really wanted to go back and look at how that was impacting kids. And my first project was as a photographer, and I'd become a filmmaker, so I wanted to go back and do a kind of social experiment in film. And also, I'm the mother of two kids. At the time, my youngest was 14 and my eldest was 20. And I saw how they were from two different generations. The eldest was a reader and was just on social media a little bit, and the youngest was on constantly. We had big battles over screen time, and got all his news from TikTok, and I just thought I really need to kind of see what's going on again. Mm-hmm.
You wanted him to record his screen so you could see what he was doing.
No, he refused to do that, but I saw like what a kind of, in a way, secret place it was, but also how important the information was.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that secret place. You know, I know you're always asked about access, given what you do, but how did you get all of these kids to open up to you, you know, in terms of the stories they share, letting you film them as they tell you about what happened while they're resting in their beds, you know, and let you watch what they've done on their phones for a year?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big trust thing, giving up the phones, but it was also kind of the ground rule of our project. Like, it was designed as a social experiment where we would follow this small group of kids in their lives for a school year and also have access to their phones. And everybody, I mean, I guess there were two challenges, the technical one and the trust one. Mm-hmm. The technical one was actually quite difficult because a lot of the tech companies and the makers of the apps don't really want you to keep the information. And so I actually hired an engineer to help me like figure out how we would capture this in real time. Mm-hmm. He couldn't figure it out, and my 14-year-old son ended up figuring out the hack. So he has a credit, a technical consultant credit. But then in terms of the trust, I mean, my work is slow journalism. I would say sometimes painfully slow journalism. Like, I spent 3 years on this. And so I think even though the ground rule was giving up their phone while we were filming, they really started sharing more and more, because what this generation is so savvy about media and what they're sharing, and it's completely different than, like, when I did my first film, Thin, about eating disorders in 2004, it's just a completely different world. So even though they were sharing their phones, I realized they were also curating what they were sharing and safeguarding what they were sharing and very conscious about what they were sharing. So really what we ended up getting was kind of the result of more and more trust building up.
Yeah. I'm really curious when it comes to the way you document. You've said before that you're a purist, that, to quote you to you, that nothing is set up, nothing is manipulated. Was that still the case with this, despite the technical hurdle?
Yeah, well, this was a little bit different because it's not a pure verite film. I think one of the things that I tried to do that I think is interesting are like the variety of perspectives. So we have verite, fly on the wall, following the kids. That's kind of similar to other things I've done before. We also have kind of breaking the fourth wall interviews where the kids have these kind of very honest, truth-telling interviews, and in a way kind of deconstruct the stuff I've seen in their real life and tell me like really what's kind of going on or narrate it. In a way that's also similar to other documentaries I've done. The two new perspectives are the group discussion. I've never done anything like that. And I started that because I really felt like kids wanted to have a place to talk about and process what they were feeling and going through with their peers. And that it was such a relief to have other kids like share similar experiences or do this to kind of say they related to what they were saying. And so that was something I just started like for my own research in the beginning, but realized it was a really important piece of it. And then the fourth perspective was their social, where we get to see, in a way, their fictions and truths about themselves, how they project, how they present. And sometimes because of the magic of documentary, you get to see like the lies, the untruths between what somebody's writing or saying, what they're doing. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, you start noticing the contradictions between their digital selves and their real selves. And like you said, there are many perspectives to this film. Correct me if I'm wrong, it took you 3 years to put all of this together, but just 2 years alone to organize all of the footage that you got from their phones?
Yeah, well, 2 years for the edit. There's 5 episodes, so it's 5 hours. So it was really the most ambitious thing I've ever done. And it takes place structurally over a year, so it kind of goes chronological, but it also follows the kids' stories, and it also is organized thematically. So you saw the first one, but in the second one, we kind of take on race and class and materialism and fame. And in the third one, eating disorders, college pressure, what I call algorithm pressure, which has kind of replaced peer pressure. And then in the fourth, it's all about sex. And then in the fifth, kind of suicidal ideation, deletions, but also we kind of see the kids finish their own stories.
So we've just watched the first episode and we've already met a couple of the characters. There will be more that you will meet over time. But how did you find your quote-unquote characters, so to speak?
And just, I realized I didn't answer your previous question about, nothing is set up. Like, you can't do that with teenagers, and you can't do that as a documentarian on such sensitive subject matter. I mean, the kids were kind of collaborators in a way, because a lot of them are also doing their own investigations, like Jonathan and Cooper, and then sharing in the group discussions, and then also giving their social media. So we worked with them really closely, but the stuff in their lives is what was happening in their lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, then just to talk about the kids that you ended up following, how do you know and how do you feel, when you've landed on someone you want to follow?
Well, a lot of the kids, so I started doing like maybe almost 200 pre-interviews, kind of mini interviews, like with roundtables at a school and also one-on-ones in the spring of 21 before I started in the fall. So I started to look for kids, and I started to also ask them like what were the important topics and look for kids whose stories might speak to those topics. But a lot of the magic happened as we were filming. Like, well, I don't want to be a spoiler, but like I had no idea about Ivy's family, for example, that is a discovery in episode 3. And I had no idea about Anthony, who is a vigilante, and I had met him in a completely different way. So that is like the exciting part that I love, is the things unfolding. But in our big group, we had about 25 kids, and there's just about 10 who we really follow their stories from the beginning to the end. So I started with the group, but then we added on through like friends or siblings or their journeys. Like Jonathan would introduce me to other kids at Teen Line. And so it was kind of organic the way I worked.
it. I'd love to know a little bit more about why you chose Los Angeles teens too. I know you're based there, but do you think the fact that you chose a school in LA, a hotbed of influencers and parties like Jack Schwartz's, affected your work and the perspective it has on social media?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have been asked this question before in the sense that like people always want to say like, oh no, those crazy people in LA, especially in Washington. But I mean, for me, LA is a very exciting place to work because for this subject, fame and branding and kind of image is a really important part of the social media world, and LA is the place where image is manufactured and celebrity, and in terms of comparison culture, the kind of keeping up with the Kardashians. So I feel like LA is the closest to the flame, but it's really like coming soon to a theater near you because LA is the bellwether, and I think in the media age, but especially in the social media age, kids all over, nationally and internationally, are being influenced by the same culture. And part of why I did this was I think this is the biggest influence of kids' lives. And when they're on it 3, 5, 8, 10 hours a day in their rooms, the room in Missouri is very similar to the room in LA. So I think kids are really gonna relate. And in our group, I tried to include a very diverse group of kids. So they're from all different kinds of neighborhoods, all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of relationships to social media.
As a result of being in LA, though, of course, you end up with this huge group of kids, and like you said, they're from different backgrounds, different walks of life. They use social media in different ways. But that also means that you and your crew are thrust into the middle of all this. And this series, like we said, it touches on a lot of difficult pressures that teens face on social media. It's body image, mental health issues, images of violence, racism, disordered eating. I have to ask, how did you and your crew handle seeing all of that in this pure form, right? We just saw somebody overdosed at a party in the first episode. How were you able to remove your feelings and not intervene as a parent yourself?
Yeah. I never think about it as removing my feelings. I really try to kind of bring my feelings and humanity to the subject. I think as a mom, I definitely kind of had skin in the game, like thinking, how is this affecting kids? And that was very different than when I did my first project where I was like almost a teenager myself. But I think, it's really nothing for me compared to what the kids are going through. And I, as a documentarian, I just love the work, and I think our whole crew loved it, and it's such a privilege when we're able to actually document what's really going on and able to gain that trust and that access that I just feel so privileged to be there. I just want to document it as kind of honestly and responsibly and true to what I'm seeing as I can. And some of the kids, when they watched, were like, this is so real. And there was a 20-something who said, it feels like one of us made it. So for me, that's like the ultimate compliment. I really tried to, one thing that I think is different about this project than other things we're hearing about social media is the kids, it's from the kids' point of view. And I really felt like the kids were the experts and they're the subjects. So they kind of have this duality. And I purposely did not have any experts in the project because I felt like we really need to hear from them.
Yeah, I was curious about that. When you went into the making of this, what were you expecting from these kids? Did you expect them to be a certain way, or? Yeah.
Well, I expected some of the effects. I knew about the body image part, and I expected some of that part, the materialism, but there was so much that surprised me. And I guess one of the first things that really surprised me is almost every kid said if they had a choice, they would rather not have it at all, and they would rather be in their parents' generation, and they were jealous of their parents not having that.
Wow.
So that was a huge surprise. And then there were a lot of surprises in the specifics where I would just try not to have my jaw falling on the floor while I was filming, but then I would go home and ask my kids, is this really happening? And there was one Jack Schwartz party where my son and all his friends showed up.
There you go. His influence is wide.
His influence is wide. In fact, when the trailer dropped last week, my son said a bunch of his friends were like, "No way, your mom made a movie about Jack Schwartz?"
Yeah, it's just FX's Jack Schwartz. I want to look at things in your career in a more macro way. You've spent, like we mentioned, you've spent so much of your career covering youth culture, in different mediums too, right? Fast Forward, it's a collection of photographs in ad campaigns like #LikeAGirl, in this docuseries. I'm curious, over time, what are some common themes you've observed, among these eras of teenagers, and what sets this one apart from the rest?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was really exciting for me in going back and looking at this subject is the way it brought together so many themes that I'd already looked at, but like on steroids. When I did Thin, my first film about eating disorders, that was 2006. At that time, it was 1 in 7 girls were affected by an eating disorder. When I started this, one of the girls said in her interview, half my friends have eating disorders from TikTok, and the other half are lying. So I think that the triggers are just so ubiquitous now that if you have like any tendency, the kind of algorithm takes you by the hand and says like, let me show you how to do this better than anybody else. I think the other thing that I've looked at is also the kind of toxic nature of comparison. Like in Generation Wealth, it was all about kind of how Keeping Up with the Joneses had become Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Well, now it's like, yeah, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, the Jenners, and every perfect anything all over the world. So I just found like everything was just kind of ever so much more so. But I think what was really new for me and kind of forced me to really grow as a director was having, first of all, 5 hours, 5 episodes. It was my first series. Thinking about the structure in a much more complicated way. And then also, it wasn't straight verite. Like I wanted to incorporate animation and like figure out how to really blend the layering of the social media in so that it could be experiential, like the way we're multitasking and we're talking to our mother while we're looking, and we're talking to the boyfriend while we're talking to the mother, and we're like looking up something while we're in school or playing a game while in school. And so I wanted to kind of figure out a way to show that.
Yeah, that's certainly something striking about this series, where we get a sense of the noise that we all feel, right? And it's incessant. And something else that I think is striking about the series, it is about these teens, but we also get a sense of what their parents are like. And I'd say, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'd say that some of them, as the series goes on, have the same insecurities as their kids. They also worry about how they're communicating. They also worry about if they're the ideal parent. They also worry about whether they should get Botox because of the images they're seeing online. So what is something that really stuck with you about the role of parenting when it comes to this generation as a parent yourself? And what can parents do?
I mean, I think one of the things I've always loved about documenting teenagers is how transparent they are about the things that affect the adult world too. And so we can kind of get this glimpse into the adult world through them. I mean, I think that when I started, I was not planning on including the parents. And then I ended up feeling like they were really important. I think that what we learn from the parents is that parents have no idea what's going on. And I include myself in that too. Like, there was a moment where Jordan was like sitting next to her mom and she's talking to a dude that she's never met before. And her mom's just like shopping or, doing something on her phone, and she's right there. So it's kind of like that thing of, we think our kids are safe because they're right there, or that we know what they're doing because they're right there. And really, there's this whole world that parents don't know about. And that was the other reason I thought we really need to show that world. So I think it'll be educational, maybe a little bit shocking for parents. But I think for most kids, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, that's us, and kind of a relief to see themselves or maybe feel seen, but I don't think it's going to be a shock.
Right, right. To some people, it'll play like real life Euphoria, and then to teens, it's just real life. I don't mean for this to sound bleak, but there are several states that are passing legislation about phone usage in schools. Tech companies like Meta are trying to roll out privacy protections for teens. That said, it does seem like these teens understand the harm that social media does, but they also can't get off of it. So do you see us at a point of no return despite the attempts to change things?
No, I feel like the series surprisingly is kind of hopeful. Like, I think by episode 5, first of all, you see how amazing the kids are and how resilient they are and how they kind of are working to be part of a solution, and how they come to this kind of wisdom that if we listen to, maybe we could make a different world for the next generation. I do think the genie's out of the bottle in terms of the exposure, especially of this generation. But, Sydney at one point says in episode 5, like, it's like with cigarettes. Like the research with cigarettes, and we know there's a connection with eating disorders, with suicidal ideation. So, they kind of talk about, like, the tech companies don't care about us. And, I do think that there are some kind of obvious solutions. I think the regulation that's happening and the move on schools, in LAUSD, they're banning phones starting next year. And in California, they're trying to do that starting in 2026. So I think it's a good direction. I'm wary of the stuff that Meta is doing because I think they're trying to head off regulation by doing small moves. But the reality is the algorithm is super toxic, and they know how to change that. Like, the whole point is maximum engagement, not the best interests of kids or anybody or our country.
Yeah. And often kids are savvier than algorithms too. Well, on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time, but Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Social Studies premieres next Friday, September 27 on FX. You can also stream the docuseries on Hulu. We invite you to share your thoughts on social media.
I forgot to mention, on the good side, there's an educational curriculum that we've made for teachers and for parents.
That's right, so that too. But just to bring it back to social media, I'm afraid, yes, if you want to share your thoughts, you can use the hashtag TAF24. Coming up next at 5 p.m., we invite all of our guests over the age of 21 to join us for happy hour here on the pier right over there. And then at 7 p.m., Atlantic Watch continues on this stage, the Culture Stage, with a screening of Lee, followed by a conversation with the film's director, Ellen Kuras, and star Kate Winslet. Enjoy the afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.